For this afternoon and tonight, a significant winter storm, including heavy snow with limited drinking.
Hello and welcome to the SnowBrains Podcast, where it's my job to interview the most intelligent people in the snow sports industry and pass their fascinating knowledge onto you, our listeners. I'm your host, Miles Clark. I'm a professional free skier, a mountain guide, an Alaska heli ski guide, a UC Berkeley molecular cell biology graduate, the founder and CEO of SnowBrains, and I just got my first colonoscopy at 46 years old. It was no big deal. The only challenge is the preparation, where you have to evacuate your bowels using laxatives. I fasted for 24 hours before I started the laxatives, making the prep super easy. The procedure itself doesn't actually even happen because they dose you hard on propofol and you're completely out. When I woke up, I felt great and loopy and fun. Easy peasy. If you're over 45 years of age and you haven't gotten a colonoscopy yet, please go get yours. It's no biggie. Today's episode of the SnowBrains Podcast is brought to you by Club Med. Escape to one of Club Med's more than 20 mountain resorts in Europe, Japan, Canada, or China, where you'll find world-class skiing and snowboard terrain, exceptional service, and endless adventure. With their all-inclusive packages, you'll get everything you need for an unforgettable ski vacation, all taken care of. Lift tickets, ski and snowboard lessons for all ages and ski levels, gourmet meals, lively après-ski activities. Visit www.clubmed.us, call 1-800-CLUB-MED, or call your travel advisor today. My guest today is Dr. Brent Hogarth, PhD, and he is all about the flow state. Dr. Brent is a licensed clinical psychologist and executive coach based in British Columbia, Canada, specializing in high-performance psychology and the science of flow state. He holds a master's degree in sports psychology and a doctorate in clinical psychology, with research focused on mindfulness and emotional regulation in athletes. As head peak performance coach at the Flow Research Collective, he has trained numerous athletes and leaders across various fields, including sports, business, and healthcare. Hello, Dr. Brent. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Coffee is hot. Snow is coming here in Vancouver, so stoked to be here.
Nice, man. When did you ski last?
Oh, you know what? I had a son 10 months ago, so skiing last winter was not as much as I'd like to. It was probably last Christmas. I had spent a few days up in Whistler, and just those moments of getting into flow on the mountain, as Abraham Maslow wisely stated, those peak moments can last us a lifetime. He really proclaimed that peak moments could really prevent suicide even. That's how powerful getting into flow, getting skiing is. So wasn't as much as I like, but I'm primed for this year, man, and gonna get after it.
Wow, I really like that quote, and we're going to dive more into that too, because I really think flow state and skiing and snowboarding have a huge amount of overlap. So let's start with your life story, because I want to get into your study of flow state and how it can help us as skiers and riders, but I'd love to hear your quick story. So a quick and dirty 3-minute life story. If it goes over 3 minutes, no problem.
Cool. So born and raised here on the North Shore in Vancouver, Canada. I was a provincial gymnast growing up, so really high level gymnast. Yeah, good foundation to play a lot of sports. For all the parents out there, get your kids into gymnastics at a young age. Just gave me the platform to ski and do everything else. So, and then I was a big into graffiti, big into basketball, hip hop culture. As a kid, so I was spray painting trains, billboards, you name it. I was kind of an out of control youth, you could say, at a time in my life. Eventually, because of that, and to be honest, being charged multiple times with assault and being in and out of court by the time I was in grade 10, I was sent to a military school in Ontario, a very strict, hardcore military school, where when you walk in, they strip you down naked and have you face a wall and just belittle the shit out of you for the first.
Intense.
Yeah. It's called Robert Land Academy. Again, if you have children and they're messing around, you could threaten them to go there. And it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. So when kids try to run away, there's no place to go.
Wow.
But it did me a lot of good. I finally got good grades. I went just for grade 12. And then I went to college And it was after, like many of us, a good heartbreak, and some pain, I
Mm.
started having a shift in my life. I think I was seeking self-acceptance, if I could frame it that way, at this point in my life. And I started just reading different books, going to church periodically. And I ended up in India. I ended up living in a Buddhist monastery for a while. 6 months I was
Wow.
there solo. Yeah. And well, I remember this one moment, meditating in this meditation, what's called Gompa, a temple, realizing that that part of myself I was trying to accept, I was trying to forgive for all the things I've done in my life, was really just like this story, this narrative, this idea, this thought that was coming and going. And in meditation, where I'm really just learning for the first time to just observe my life, observe my thoughts, observe my emotions, not get swept by them, I realized that that story wasn't really me. And so that journey of trying to accept it was kind of over in that way. And it really freed me up. Be like, okay, how else do I want to live my life? Am I going to follow these same roles and rules I've lived my whole life, that I've been socialized to play, that I've kind of, my upbringing kind of reinforced? Or can I live a lot differently? And that really freed me up. And I ended up, again, doing a master's in sports psych, a doctorate in clinical psychology in San Francisco. I lived in a 25-person hippie collective. It
Whoa,
was
yeah,
one.
that tunnel gets you hippie quick.
Oh yeah, real quick. We would go to
Yeah.
Burning Man together, all the Northern California festivals.
Nice.
Yeah, I'll tell you more stories about that in a bit. But the whole
Please.
time when I was in grad school, I studied flow state. So I really wanted to understand these peak moments where we'd get into the zone, whether it was me in basketball or graffiti, or really, to be honest, fighting. These street
Mm.
fights I'd get into were the most intense flow states, and it became exactly what I studied in my dissertation, which was not just flow state, again, the ability to get into the zone, and we can go into that, but also its potential dark side. So how getting into the zone, while it could lead to peak performance, feeling at our best, it can also lead to a loss of self-control. We'll go
Mm.
into that. And so I looked specifically at how meditation and mindfulness could help us get the best out of flow and protect against its potential dark side. And so that really became the launching point for me. And I'll shut up here in a second to be a coach. And I'm a licensed psychologist in British Columbia now. But really, I coach executives and enterprise-sized companies around the world and Olympians, including snow athletes, how to get into flow in their sport or in their craft.
Well, that's what I'm so excited to talk to you today about is I'm so interested in flow state as an athlete. And then obviously I've never heard of the dark side of flow state. So I think we'll start with what flow state is and then get into that darker side because that is exciting and kind of
Yeah,
terrifying.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
so to start, can you explain what is flow state and why is it so important for peak performance in athletes, skiers, and riders?
Yeah, so flow state, often known as being in the zone, runner's high, in the groove, the pocket. It's those moments in life where we become completely absorbed in the moment, completely absorbed in a task. And what happens when we're fully absorbed, so fully immersed, is that our sense of self, we transcend it. We're no longer thinking, am I happy or am I sad? Am I doing things right? We're just there. We kind of conquer that inner critic. So we fully absorb, we transcend a sense of self. Time can speed up or slow down. It's like going through the trees, or in the backcountry, and it feels like time's going really slow. You're so
Hmm.
ridiculous. Or maybe you skied a whole day and it felt like 1 minute, right? So
Hmm.
time distorts. We feel this sense of really interesting, this sense of merging with ourself and others. So ourself and the mountain, right? Ourself and our skis or snowboard. We feel this sense of action and awareness merging. So that real sense of unity, such a powerful state, related to like peak mystical, religious even experiences. And I'll go into like the specific triggers of flow, but I'll just summarize by flow only ever occurs when we're engaged in a goal, like when we're pursuing that run, that challenge, that professional goal, whatever it might be. And so the great benefit of flow is that it transforms challenging moments into moments where we become intrinsically motivated. Like we ski just because we fucking love to ski. An
Yes.
artist paints because they love to paint. And so when you think about flow, it's a great catalyst to performance and well-being because again, it's an intrinsically motivated state. And the one last piece I'll add to that, the golden rule to flow, how you get into flow and why it leads to so much growth is what's called the challenge skill balance. So when
Mm,
our skill level is matched to a challenge, and really when we're using the best of our skills and taking on big challenges, that's when we become absorbed, right? That's when we
mm.
become engaged. And as you can kind of intuit from that, that means as we get better, we need to take on bigger challenges. And that's again the great benefit of flow. It's like it's forcing us to grow, take on bigger challenges. And as we go into the dark side of flow, especially for, let's say, snow athletes or extreme athletes, that's where it can become really dangerous. If you become what we call like a flow junkie and just needing that bigger thrill, bigger rush, it can put us in some pretty scary situations.
Absolutely. And I do want to talk more about that. And I love that graph that you built in our heads, which is challenge versus skill. Because I think skiers and snowboarders, we get that intrinsically that if we take a mellow run, we're not in flow state. Where you take a mellow run, you might be thinking about a phone call you have later or bills to pay or something. But when you have a challenging run, it absorbs your mind and body so much. And that's where the magic is, I think. Anywhere near the top of your ability level and anywhere close even, because that's what people love about skiing and snowboarding, right? You don't think about your problems. You don't think about your bills you have to pay. But one thing you said made me very interested. You said that you, in a flow state, would merge with other things. Like you could merge with a mountain, you could merge with the snow. Could you merge with other people? Because I kind of feel that sometimes. After a great run with my buddies, and sometimes after a great one with someone I don't even know, I am
Mhm.
all over that person. I am giving them hugs and like tackling them sometimes. And it's kind of crazy. The
Yes.
person's like usually in the same state as me, so they're right back with me. But it's
Yes.
really interesting. I want to hear what you think on
You
that.
you bet. So when we talk about flow, so far we've talked about just individual flow. But what's
Mhm.
even more fun is flowing together. Part of that reason to go back to that challenge skill balance is, especially in the workplace, but skiing too, is that challenge becomes even a little bit greater to get into flow as a group. So when you enter it, it's even more of a euphoric state. So we talk about group flow. So group flow is, let's say you meet a stranger on the chairlift. Now you guys are able to get into flow on that next run for a number of reasons that are really good prerequisites to flow. So here we go. We got a shared goal, right? We're going to ski, we're going to go hard, whatever it might be. We get immediate and relevant feedback. So when you
Mm,
think about skiing, I agree with you. It's the easiest way for me to get into flow. It's my high flow activity
mm,
because you can play with that challenge skill balance. You can go a little bit faster. You can ski a little bit tighter. You can go through the trees, whatever it might be. You get all this feedback. Your legs are wobbling, the wind's in your hair, the temperature, everything is just engaging you, absorbing you into the experience. So again, for group flow, you got shared goal, immediate feedback. You got equal participation. So like you're both
mm.
getting after it. You're both probably wooing at each other, giving feedback. There's equal kind of skin in the game. And big thing with flow I haven't gone into as well as what a trigger is risk. So
Mm.
obviously we know with skiing, there's physical risk, but there's also like creative risk we can take with the style we're skiing the slope with or whatnot. And so yeah, group flow is a really powerful thing to tap into. And to your point, what happens is it's called interbrain synchrony or interpersonal synchrony. So when you
Ooh.
are skiing with that person and you get back on the chairlift, your brain waves will be synced up, your breathing will be synced up, your heart rate will be synced up. And what happens, again, that merging with each other, literally in your neurobiology, it promotes what's called all these pro-social behaviors. So everything you're talking about, like
Mm.
you trust the person, you love the person, you got empathy for the person, you're stoked to be the person. And I think, if we're wanting to have good friends in life, you get on the fucking ski mountain with them, do anything where you're getting to flow, especially for partners, and it brings us so close.
And I think as skiers and riders, we experience that a lot, especially if it's, as you're saying, if it's a run near the top of your ability level, or if it really is a run in my case, and some really high level skiers and riders, there's real consequences. You could get hurt or killed if anything goes wrong here. And when you pull it off and you get to the bottom, man, you feel insane connection to the people that you experience that with. So it's so cool to hear that, your brain waves, your breathing, your heart rate, so many things are connected to this person, even when it's somebody you don't really know that well, because I guess you're both internally just experiencing the same things. And that I've never heard of group flow. And that's something I want to dig way more into. I'll find some books on that because that's my favorite thing in the world now. I never knew how to say it. Like group flow is insane. And I think I've even experienced it in basketball and stuff like that, right? Maybe watching the Golden State Warriors basketball team in their heyday, they had that group flow, I bet, especially seeing like Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and just playing so well together. And obviously whatever's going on inside them, in basketball, we call it chemistry, as you know.
Yep.
That maybe that's what they mean when they say the team has chemistry. They're saying group flow.
You're right on it. Absolutely. So for a long time, team chemistry was like this black box in the social sciences. We didn't really know what was going on, but now we do understand it's, again, this state called interbrain or interpersonal synchrony. So that is, and to dive down deeper, kind of the originator of some of this thinking is a guy named Keith Sawyer. You can read some of his interesting work. A good example you could imagine for group flow is like improv. Right. So just in your conversations, and we could play with it today, is when someone shares an idea, if you say yes and build off of it, right? You think about this with your partners, with your colleagues. If you say yes and, again, it's helping our egos merge into a goal, and you can divert it any way, right? Like improv, but as long as we're saying yes and we feel joined in the project or the conversation, we're building on each other. Yeah, so Keith Sawyer's work, there's a bunch of articles I'll share specific to neuroscience and the science of how to apply group flow. It's fascinating. And again, what I love about it is that individual flow is fun, but to your point, like getting into flow as a group, whether it's one-on-one, two people, whether it's a team or a whole group at a concert, those are the real peakest of moments.
It's insane, man. And I think I'm just so glad to have this defined in my life. I never knew this was a concept and had a definition. This makes me, it just, I don't know, it's like my heart feels lighter having learned this, because now I was like, oh, wow, here's something I really want to dig into, because now I have a name for it, because I think this is the most special thing in my whole life, because you can obviously get this kind of flow with your partner. I love that you mentioned improv, because I love like just making jokes with my friends, like banter, talking shit, and you get that in, even in that sometimes, right? Like you mentioned improv, so I think most of us think of comedy. And so, yeah, when you're doing like little, just trying to be funny with your friends, sometimes you're just really linking with some person or maybe more than one people. And then this must happen even in the workplace. And so this is something that has a lot of everyday potential to make us all better.
Yeah. I'm curious, could you share with me and maybe others that like one of those moments for you where you felt like, again, you guys did some terrain or whatnot that was super high risk, and that feeling of just like being super close and tight? And then I'll share a good story too.
Just without thinking too deeply, I think it was back in 2016. I was with my buddy Fox, and he's one of my favorite ski buddies. And we were skiing in the park, and the terrain park is super scary for me. And I'm getting older now, I'm 46. I guess back then I was a little younger, but there's a lot of consequence for me. This is, in my mind and in my skill set and in my behavior pattern with skis on, this is where I feel like I have the best chance of getting hurt, because the falls are bad, and I took a really bad fall in the park a couple of years ago. It was my hardest fall of the year. And so anyway, we're on the chairlift, and Fox is just like, I have this trick called a D spin 720. It's like a cork seven. And he's like, it's time for the D. And like for like a couple chairlifts, and I wasn't even going to do it that day. He's like, it's time. And he was throwing crazy tricks. And eventually, we our minds kind of linked up, and we were at the top, and he's like, this is it, man. You're ready. It's time to go. And he got me to where he was, and I did it, and I landed on my feet, and it just was insane. And we weren't that close back then. He was kind of new guy for me. We actually even had some bad blood in the history, in our skiing history. And but from then on, it was like tackle hugging him and just in love. And it was just like, from that moment on, we've just been really close, and it's just been incredible.
That's so cool. And one thing you pointed to there is that flow is contagious, right? So you said he brought me to that state.
Yeah,
he was
locked
there. In. Yeah, that's such a fucking good story, man. I love it.
Thanks,
that's
man.
rowdy.
And it's fun when a story comes to your head without having to search, just like, oh,
yes,
here.
Yes. So, one of my mentors in the flow space is a guy named Stephen Kotler. For all the action and adventure athletes here, you're probably familiar with a lot of Steven's work. His one book, The Rise of Superman, really looked at
Yes.
flow state in action adventure sports. And he really talked about how this massive increase in skills, the level of complexity and challenge of tricks, let's just say in the park, has expanded so much over the last 20 years. And his view was that, what's accelerated this innovation is flow state. So here's a funny story coming back to how skiing can connect us with people. So I was living in El Paso, Texas, doing my pre-doctoral internship. So I was a counselor at at UTEP, and I started a sports psychology program there. And Steven was in New Mexico at that time. So we went up to a couple mountains, first time ever meeting him. And he had actually done a video you can see on YouTube, a really good one on the dark side of flow that kind of helped me in understanding where I wanted to go. Anyways, the first time we're skiing, we dropped acid together. And
Nice.
yeah,
Wow.
so had that, again, I lived in San Francisco, so I'd done it a couple of times.
You've been to
Beautiful
Burning Man.
day. Yeah, it was a beautiful day, sunny day. I think the mountain was called Wolf Creek, something like that in
Yeah,
New
that's in
Mexico.
southern Colorado. It gets the most snow in Colorado.
Okay, so we were there, and it was hard groomers,
Mhm.
sunny, fast as hell. And again, what happens in psychedelic state is this what's called the default mode network. So like
Mm.
our normal resting state of the brain that has what's called these heavily weighted priors. What that means is like these heavily weighted ways of thinking. You can imagine like weights on your neural pathways so that you keep looking at the world in a consistent fashion. These heavily weighted priors, that's called, get lifted off of your brain, your nervous system, so that you can have these huge insight, these huge creative moments, really see the world with the veils of perception lifted. And
Mm.
that led to me obviously connecting, having a fun day with Steven, but also working as their coach for a few years and having great relationships still to this day. And and again, my work now with Michael Gervais with the Finding Mastery podcast, and our relationship, no acid, but skiing Whistler for the last decade. It truly is where I get closest with people and build that trust. There's something really special. It's a mystical experience. And one thing I'll just add to that is when we want to get into flow, why skiing is such an easy way to get into it is because it's context, like it's an environment that has all these flow triggers built into it. And for those who are like, yeah, I get into flow skiing, but I don't get into work. Here's some kind of breadcrumbs you can follow. The first rule of flow, again, is a clear goal. So when you step onto the mountain, it's clear why you're there, right? Next is immediate feedback. So again, you get all the feedback when you're skiing. The next golden rule is a challenge skill balance. So you got a high challenge, you're bringing your best skills, but you also have a number of other characteristics that are just primed in the flow environment. It's like you step onto the snow, like when an athlete step onto the soccer pitch. There's all these flow triggers built into it. So you want to do that with, let's say, your office space as well. When you step to your desk, have a super clear goal of why you're there. Have a boundary. Like, you don't want to be working in your bedroom. Ideally, you want to have like a really kind of like a flow tempo where everything's set up, everything's clear, you get tons of feedback. So you want to condition your workplace again, similar to a mountain where you don't need to like try to force yourself to get into flow. It's like this is primed to get into flow like the ski mountain. So just some breadcrumbs there for those kind of knowledge workers working from home too. And maybe the last thing I'll share is, I'm sure you've experienced this. If you go on the mountain in the morning and you have a great day, you're ton of flow, when you come back noon or whatever and to do some work, you have a heightened level of creativity, heightened level of engagement or productivity. And that's the benefit of flow. There's this saying, the more flow we get, the more flow we get. So if we can get on the mountain in the morning, there's a carryover effect for even up to a few days, research has found, where we're just that much more engaged, intrinsically motivated. So yeah, it's a perfect prescription for burnout, for people who are in malaise. Yeah, you name it.
Every time you talk, I have so many questions, but I think
Perfect.
I feel that too. So like you said, I have a great day. Maybe I get off the mountain by noon, and I noticed that, and again, this is I'm realizing all this as we talk. I think I'll come home from a great flow day of skiing, and I'll realize, hey, I want more. I don't realize I want more challenge. And I don't know why, and I get that's probably why. It's like I want to find that flow state again in something else. So a lot of times I'll really dig into my work, get on my computer. And what I really like to do is edit the photos and videos from that day. And I find that I'll lose, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, 2 hours just went by and I'm not even done with this edit yet because I'm just enjoying it so much and it's challenging and it's also kind of taking me back to flow state I might have been on skis because it's a video that
Yep.
I just filmed a couple hours ago. And something I'm really curious about your feedback on is I have randomly trained myself right before I drop into a challenging run. I always say 3, 2, 1, drop. And I've
Mm-hmm.
seen a little bit of psychology around this about how that can help you focus. But what do you think I'm doing when I do that?
Great question. So I'm just kind of freestyling here. So I haven't
Hmm.
looked specific at this as a pre-performance routine is what you'd probably call it.
Hmm.
When we think about flow, the simplest definition, so I've given you definitions, it's when we feel and perform at our best, it's when we're fully absorbed in the moment. But if you go back to the literature and the initial author on flow, and I recommend people to read his work because it's so rich. His name's Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. It's
Hmm.
called Flow, the Psychology of Optimal Experience. It will blow your world apart. This book is so rich. And he defines flow initially as simply order in consciousness, right? So when you think you're at the top, you're about to drop in, your mind could be going a million different places, right?
Yes.
That's a state of chaos, right? That's a
Hmm.
state of overwhelm. And so in 3, 2, 1, you're ordering your thinking, ordering your consciousness. Like you're saying, you're getting clear on the goal and you're getting absorbed into it. So that's what I would think. It's like it's structuring, it's an intention that's kind of forcing your consciousness to go from A to B, not thinking about everything else that could go on.
That's what it feels like to me. And I see something similar even in lots of things, but baseball players, you ever notice that before they go to when they're going to bat, before every pitch, guys will do all this weird stuff, but it's the same.
Oh,
They'll
yeah.
like touch their hat, touch their face, do their gloves. I think Alex Rodriguez would always tighten his gloves every single time. And I think that was similar. I think, I'm curious what your thoughts are. Like getting them ready to like, hey, game on. Don't think about anything else.
Yeah, again, I think that forcing function to create order. Another piece around flow is really interesting. So we typically get into flow in things that have become second nature, right? So
Mm,
when you think about the process of learning, to do that 700 or whatnot, it starts off where you're having to think a lot, right? Like it's
hmm.
very clunky, you're in your head. And then as that skill becomes well learned, it becomes ingrained in deeper structures in our brain where we no longer need to think about it. That's why that 3, 2, 1 probably gets you focused, gets you engaged, gets you out of your head. I work with some Olympic snowboarders right now, one in particular I'm thinking about, and their pre-performance routine is just connecting with a sense of gratitude to be there, like a sense of awe before
I
they
like
drop
that.
in, right? Because it's one of the things I've talked about, and I'm going to go a little bit deeper. So I'm going to go on a little tangent here.
Let's do it.
So I started my dissertation off with the Plato quote, the first and greatest victory is to conquer oneself. So
Hmm.
I'm going to talk about conquering oneself in flow state and then its potential dark side and how mindfulness is a way to conquer the self. It can be really helpful. So let me explain this. So the first and greatest victory is to conquer oneself. So in a flow state, we conquer ourselves, like that inner critic that holds us back because we get so absorbed in the task that literally that part of the brain that holds our sense of self, it down regulates. There's an interesting scientific term called transient hypofrontality. So temporary down regulation of the frontal cortex. So when you're
Mm.
engaged, absorbed 3, 2, 1, that part of your brain is slowly probably quieting down. And then you're again just operating from these deep, well ingrained aspects or parts of your brain where that skill is stored. So you don't need to think, you need to just be able to free yourself to act. And so, tying full circle now, the great benefit of flow, right, is that we transcend a sense of self. We feel and perform at our best. So 3, 2, 1, thinking of gratitude, all gets us out of our head. The dark side again is we can need a bigger cliff to jump off. We could need a bigger challenge, bigger mountain to climb, or bigger risk to take. And while that can lead to a peak moment, if it's putting us at risk to long-term values and goals, right? Like say we have a family that we need to provide for, and we're on the mountain nonstop and we're not taking care of some of our responsibilities. That's part of the dark side of flow. Other part of the dark side of flow is like impaired risk perception, especially for beginners. When someone's in a flow state, they're not thinking about themselves. They're so confident, jacked up, that they'll take risks. So there's really interesting studies with kayakers who showed that master kayakers, they're a master. They can perceive risk well when they're in a flow state, but as a beginner, that really can be a challenge. And another piece of the dark side of flow is it's extremely addictive, right? So you think about skiing, you love it, you chase snow because you fucking love it. You're also probably addicted to it in some regard, right?
No question.
Yeah, and in a good way. It's a great addiction to have. What's happening there is that in a flow state, we get hit with the most addictive neurochemical cocktail endogenously. So we get hit with massive amount of dopamine. We get a ton of what's called anandamide. So anandamide is like an endocannabinoid. It's like smoking a joint. It's called the bliss molecule, right? So when you think of runner's high, that's literally what's happening. We feel this euphoria. So dopamine, anandamide, we get a ton of adrenaline, right? We feel energized, strong, confident. Then we get on the back end, this going right to those moments where you're hugging people at the end of that run. We get serotonin, so we feel good, we feel whole, and we get oxytocin, where it's like this love drug. We feel so connected to other people. So we want that more and more. And the challenge with that is, again, it's good to get into flow. It's a huge benefit. But if it's leading to a loss of self-control and other things we need to be doing in our life, obviously that can be a dark side of it. And the last piece I'll just add into the dark side of flow is that we do go from these huge highs, right? Like we're talking about, to potentially some huge lows, right? It's like almost clinically depressed. And that's where it becomes very precarious for what we can kind of jokingly call flow junkies. It's like, where are you going to get your next flow, right? And is it going to be in something that can lead to your self-destruction, drug, sex, rock and roll? We can go on. Or can it be a state that is going to be still in line with your values? And this is coming back now to mindfulness. So in mindfulness, as we can all probably appreciate, it's a deeper sense of flow, in the sense that we learn to conquer oneself, not by getting engaged and absorbed in something that we kind of get washed away by the river, but we learn to let go of our attachment to our thinking, to our thoughts, and to ourself, right? And so we can be still, present, sitting in meditation, and feel this sense of transcendence, right? The sense of being beyond, that sense of awe. We have more control to enter a mindful state than flow. Flow is very hard. You need those conditions. You need to be on the mountain, whatever it might be. But if people can learn more and more to enter more of a mindful flow state, they can have a lot more self-control in their life. So I went on a tangent there. I'm wondering, does that connect to you? Any questions around, again, how the first and greatest victory is to conquer oneself? We want to do that as much as possible in flow, and to do that in our day-to-day life, like through the mundane tasks, through the times we can't be skiing. If we're able to transcend a sense of self through being fully present, engaged, absorbed in just the here and now, let go of our attachment to our thoughts, we can still maintain that kind of euphoric, transcendent experience.
That definitely connects with me. And in one of the most profound ways that I understand in mountain communities, and we might go way off the rails here, but you said flow state junkie, which I think is the same thing we call adrenaline junkies. And that's really common in the mountains. And you said how that can lead to the negative side of flow, which I want to ask more about. And in that same vein, we have these adrenaline junkies that you're saying flow state junkies, and that has all kinds of implications in our communities in the mountains. And one of the things that's really negative is I think that there is a connection to that and our extremely high rates of suicide in the Intermountain West. So you might already know this, but we have the highest per capita rates of suicide in the Intermountain West, and Alaska has it too. Alaska might be more based on daylight and some other things. It's a little more complicated up there. But in the Intermountain West, I'm talking, right down the Rocky Mountains, and even including Lake Tahoe, they put that in there too. We have this highest per capita rate of suicide. And I think From what I've studied, that adrenaline junkie thing is part of it because these people
Wow.
get their highs from being adrenaline junkies. And then as we age, so you can picture somebody my age, about 46 years old,
Mhm.
I can't do what I used to do anymore. My body's starting to break down. I've probably left my community to move to these mountain places. I can't get my rocks off. I can't get that adrenaline high as often anymore. And I'm not performing as high a level. So I'm probably not in that flow state like I used to be. That kind
Mhm.
of was my bread and butter of my why, my purpose. And
Mhm.
now that's fading, and you can see how that could potentially lead to drug and alcohol addictions and problems and so on. And so you probably know more about this than me, and I'm curious
Yeah.
if that makes sense to you, if there is a
Yeah.
through line.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I wasn't aware of that. And
Mm,
I want, let's really go into this. And I want to just like take a moment to honor everyone who has passed. I'm
yes.
sure your community members and yourself included, myself included, we've lost people to this, let's call it the dark side of flow.
Hmm.
And that is, when I wrote my dissertation, and again, I wrote it after reading some stories specifically about Dean Potter. And
And I met Dean. I knew Dean a little bit. We had a
mhm,
Cliff Bar summit once. We made a Cliff Bar together. He called Sweet Lorraine.
beautiful. So he literally spoke the words, and I'm quoting, I believe, and it's in that video on the dark side of flow from Stephen Kotler, that when he's not in a flow state, he felt clinically depressed. I said that those are
Mm,
his words. And he said,
mhm,
the great part about flow is that it forces me, drives me to get back there. But,
mhm,
he's one example for me that, really made it clear that we need to learn to manage this state. And a book that before that led me into this insight was a book called Transcendent Moments in Sport by Michael Murphy, the owner, founder of Esalen Institute in Big Sur.
beautiful place.
Yeah, beautiful spot. And so in this book, he talked about athletes going from these peak moments to their life being in chaos. And he
Mm,
framed it this way. He said they didn't have a workable philosophy to put those peak moments into their day-to-day life. It was like these transcendent, out-of-world moments. And like, how do you bring that and integrate it into your day-to-day life? And that's
mhm.
why I proposed that learning mindfulness and meditation could help us do that.
This episode of the SnowBrains Podcast is brought to you by Club Med, calling all ski enthusiasts. Elevate your winter getaway with an all-inclusive experience at Club Med. The resorts in France, Switzerland, Italy, and Quebec offer a seamless blend of breathtaking ski adventures, locally inspired cuisine like fondue, and lively après-ski delights, all included in your package, so you can focus on conquering the slopes, indulging in the flavors, and creating unforgettable memories with your loved ones. Visit www.clubmed.us. Call 1-800-CLUB-MED or call your travel advisor to craft your ski dreams.
But let's go again, specifically, you brought up a really good case study. Stephen Kotler, again, my mentor, he talked about how you follow him now on Instagram or whatnot. He's always posting pictures of like drawings now because he's
Mm-hmm.
older than you. And the last thing Mihai Csikszentmihalyi told him before he passed recently, a couple of years ago, was that you need to find the ability to get into flow beyond physical things.
Ooh.
Yeah, you need to be able to have something sustainable as you age. And part of the reason I think why is because when we get into flow, we connect to a deeper sense of self. And Csikszentmihalyi talked about like this sense of enhanced complexity of the self when we emerge from it. Like we feel like we've grown so much. And to your point, if we're not getting that as we age, it could feel like a part of us has died,
Yeah, and I think a
right?
lot of people, their value as a human is wrapped up in that, right? In that performance.
Exactly. And thank you for pointing to that. So we get a ton of reinforcement, right? You do a sick trick, everyone's like, yeah, man, that
They
was
think you're
awesome.
rad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so this is right to the point of my dissertation, connecting back to my Buddhist kind of experiences is to overcome the dark side of flow, we want to seek refuge, right? Like seek a deep sense of connection to ourselves, not in a flow state, but really in this mindful ability to be here and now in the stillness of life, seek refuge and freedom in that state, not in something that's elusive, that's dependent in all these things. Like, yes, get after it, get flow, but
Mm-hmm.
realize that it's like a false refuge flow
Mm.
state because it's transient, it's temporary, and it can't last forever. It can't even last, a whole day. It comes and it
It's
goes.
hard to achieve.
It's one of the most elusive psychological states, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to seek refuge in what we can have control over, and that's the ability to be here and now and present. It's hard
Mm-hmm.
enough as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, that is all fascinating. I wrote down so many notes during that. And so, gosh, where should I even go? So we're getting into the dark side of flow a little bit more. So let's just start at the beginning. What is the dark side of flow? What does it entail? Which you've kind of hit on, but let's hit it again and just make it real clear. And then what can we do to battle it?
Yeah. So very clearly, the dark side of flow is how a flow state can lead to a loss of self-control. So what happens in flow is that there's a trade-off. We become much more efficient, right? We're confident, we're attacking things. And the trade-off is that we lose flexibility. Okay, so there's this efficiency, flexibility trade-off. Flexibility being behavioral flexibility, like, hey, wait, let me stop, readjust. Emotional flexibility. You imagine you're in a flow state, let's just say anger, right? I'm sure some of us can relate. Like you just feel so absorbed, kind of emotionally hijacked when you're angry that you can lose some flexibility in your behavior. It's like 2 seconds later when you calm down, it's like, why did I do that?
Mm.
Right. And so there's this trade-off in flow. So again, dark side of flow is how it could lead to a loss of self-control, specifically this trade-off between flexibility and efficiency. And what can we do about it? Oftentimes, high flow seekers, people that get a lot of flow, they actually need to pump the brakes on flow. They need to learn to actually have oftentimes less flow.
Mm.
And how I think about this is like intentionally oscillating between flow and mindfulness. So in flow, we're fully absorbed, we lose a sense of self, we're fucking ripping and running. And in
Mm-hmm.
a mindful state, we're self-aware, right? We have that flexibility to adapt and adjust. So I think about like an optimal way to live our life is to intentionally oscillate between mindfulness and flow, mindfulness and flow. And so when I think about skiing, for an example, it's like you're mindful, you're present, perhaps as you go up the chairlift, plan your route, aware, okay, do I have the capacity to take on this run? Do I have my equipment? Am I safe? Etc., etc. You're being self-aware, you're prepping yourself, and you're saying, yeah, this is a good opportunity for me to drop in. Let's go for it. And
Mm-hmm.
then you step into flow right when you get on the mountain and you go for it. So that's how I think about like really intentionally oscillating between mindfulness and flow in order to protect against its potential dark side. And the last piece I'll just add, again, creating a workable philosophy so that you can take those peak moments from the mountain and integrate it into your day-to-day life. So I heard earlier you mentioned like for you, maybe the best thing is like connecting with other people when you're skiing,
Love it.
right? It's like, how do you get to experience that and still live in alignment with that value throughout your life? Obviously, you're on this podcast right now.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, SnowBrains is all about connecting people and community. And so you've integrated those peak moments into like a sustainable way that you can experience, as you age and in any moment in your life. So that would be my real encouragement is develop a mindfulness practice, learn to oscillate between flow and mindfulness intentionally, and then really be intentional of like, how can I bring the values that bring me to life when I'm skiing or snowboarding or on the mountain into my day-to-day life. We want to live a life of authenticity, a life of consistency and alignment. So we just got to think about how can we bring those strengths from the mountain into our day-to-day life.
I really like that. It's so many great points in that. And one thing I saw full circle on, or at least a through line on, is we've had Dr. Kevin Stone, an orthopedic surgeon, on this podcast. I've had him on twice, and he always is talking about how mindfulness will help you avoid injury. And I think it's in what you're saying too, but just to make it more explicit, the way Dr. Stone talks about it is be mindful before you do something. So I got hurt. I just looked at my shoulder throwing a backflip this year, and I was with some young kids and they were doing stuff, and I wasn't
Of
sure on the
course.
speed. And it was kind of my turn. And normally I'd say, no, I'm not ready. I'm going to like visualize. I'm going to watch some other people go and learn the speed. I just turned my brain off and went. And it did not work out well. I dislocated my shoulder, my biggest injury I've had in plus years, and it sucked. So I really, I reviewed that with him. He's like, yeah, that's exactly right. He's like, and Dr. Stone gets that all the time. He always says when athletes, especially high level athletes, come in and talk with him about their injury, more often than not, I mean, he even thinks, almost all of them say, yeah, I didn't have my mind right. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't being mindful. Or even in that situation for me, had I been mindful, I would have not done that. Maybe it would have crashed, but I don't think it would have gotten hurt. So
Yeah.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I want to talk to Dr. Stone, maybe listen back to that podcast. And
Yeah, I would love to get you two together on a podcast.
that,
You guys should just
that
do your own podcast and I'll listen.
that sounds exactly, again, what I found in my dissertation. Again, I spent 3+ years really studying the potential dark side of flow. And, we can go into the neuroscience a little bit. I've already done that a little bit. But the point being is that we lose flexibility when we're in flow state. It's like, okay, the idea was to do this backflip now. Let's go for it. Right. And at times we might need to adjust, right? We might
Hmm.
need to adapt, take our
Hmm.
time, whatever it might be. And so I love that point that each athlete has shared with Dr. Stone, how they just didn't have their mind right. They didn't have enough self-awareness prior to letting go. Because we got to let
Hmm.
go, right? You got to go for
Hmm.
it. That's the euphoric piece about flow and why it takes so much courage. But if we're just doing that recklessly, and I love this point around you're around younger people and you think about groups in that kind of mob mentality, or you
Yep.
just even think of society as a whole, some of the ways we live our life are so not aligned to if we're really mindful and present of what's important to us. Again, it's like the contagion, our behavior,
Hmm.
and we're going a little into social psychology, but we are submissive. We bow to authority as people, we
Hmm.
conform. And
Hmm.
so when we think about flow, it's like we want to find flow in something that helps us individuate, become our own unique person. And it's kind of this process of individuating, getting my own style as a skier, my own style as a person. And then, yes, integrating back with the group. Okay, how can I bring my skills that I've developed on my own and be of support and service? And then let me re-individuate again, become, make sure I'm still aligned by my own drives, my own desires, not conforming. And so it's like this upward spiral of individuating and then kind of integrating, individuating, integrating. And what I hear in your example, at least, is like maybe there's like such an integration, such a closeness that you didn't have that self-awareness to be like, hold on, let me take my time today.
And I think in a scientific way, you're talking about peer pressure too, right? Like
Yep.
you want to be a part of a group, and humans are herd animals, whether you like it or not. We don't do
Mhm.
well with loneliness. We don't do well alone.
Nope.
And if you really wanted to go back in human psychology, evolutionary psychology, if you got kicked out of the village, you were probably going to die. And so there's a real fear. And these days, that's not really true. You could probably not interact with anyone and live great. We have DoorDash. You could get food, you could be very alone and survive, but you do poorly because of the way our evolutionary psychology has designed our brains. We are designed to understand that being a part of the group is very important, very integral to who we are and what we do. So I think what that does is, that led to my behavior that day that, oh, I want to be part of this group. I'm going to throw a backflip even though I'm not ready to. And luckily I wasn't hurt badly. And that really was a great lesson because when that happens
Mhm.
again, and again, this has happened a bunch of times in my life too,
Of
right? So
course.
I should have learned
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
And I've already like talked about this lesson, but it happens again. I'm going to think, all right, I want to get my mind right. And if it's not right, I'll skip this and I'm not going to be kicked out of the village and die. So
Hmm.
everything's going to be okay. And I want to lead you down this path a little bit more of the darker side of flow state because I think it's something that mountain communities will understand. In another place, we talked about suicide, which is very unfortunate in our mountain communities. And we also had, especially in Lake Tahoe, we had this really big string of extreme athletes dying, like Shane McConkey and Eric Roner, and all these people who were doing these extreme sports. And a lot of it did come down to human flying, like base jumping or ski base jumping, wingsuiting. But some of it is just skiing. And I'm guessing that's a part of this dark side of flow state as well. These people, they've had and Dean Potter is one of them too, right? So they've had so much exposure to very high danger situations. And that is a big part of their flow state, I believe. And you do that eventually, it's probably going to lead to getting really hurt or dead. And I'm curious if that's a part of what your understanding as well.
Absolutely. And again, I want to be like really sensitive. All those people you mentioned are legends.
Legends.
that lived incredible lives. And so when I say that flow can lead to a loss of self-control, right? And that accidentally dying is not the goal, which I think
Mm-mm.
is fair to say. I do not wish to like shame. I'm just like really sensitive about that because these people are actualizing their full potential when they're
Mm-hmm.
doing these things. And that's truly what we seek in life is like, man, I'll tell you, I've coached over 1,000 high performers, and the one question I have on my survey intake is, what is your greatest fear? And every single one of them, of my clients, for the most part, say like not fulfilling my full potential, not leaving my
Mm.
legacy. And all these people did that, right? And so
Right.
there's like a huge respect and honor in that, and also a recognition that they obviously didn't wish, most of the time to pass doing it. I'm sure many of them had that thought and realization that it obviously can happen, and perhaps
Mm-hmm.
they're totally okay with that. I'm not sure. Have you had that conversation ever with people of like just the recognition of how likely it could be, and how they're okay with that?
I have that conversation with people all the time
Hmm.
because it's happened to me. I've had near-death experiences on the mountain, and it's happened to most all of my close ski partners. And we ski in no-fall zones. I'm trying to get myself away from that kind of practice, but we ski in avalanche terrain, and I'm trying to lower my risk profile as I get older. But I just started helicopter ski guiding, and I'm the first one that drops in, and Alaska has big slopes and there's big consequences, and people much more experienced than me have died. I have this conversation with people all the time.
So how have you come to peace with that possibility in your life?
I don't know if I have, honestly. It's something that I have a lot of fear because in that survey, when you said, what do you fear the most? I thought you were going to say death. And
Mm,
maybe a lot of our listeners did too, because that's what I would have said. Because maybe as I'm older too now, I feel like I did realize a lot of my potential. At 46,
yeah.
how much radder am I going to get? In that category, I do think there's a lot of
Yeah.
potential for people my age and older to do really cool intellectual things and creative projects and more. But yeah, it's something I don't think I've come to terms. I do have a big fear of that. I do understand that I'm lowering my risk profile. I'm not as skiing as crazy as I was and aggressively as I was. But where it gets me is in the avalanche situation. You
Okay.
can get in an avalanche on mellow terrain. Avalanches, they don't care who you are, and it's something I'm exposed to quite a lot because I spend a lot of time in avalanche terrain. So it's just something that I try to be
Hmm.
aware of. So I guess
Hmm.
to answer your question better, it's awareness, and I think mindfulness have been my ways of doing it. I've started meditating in the last year. I do
Nice.
it probably 5 days a week, and just really being mindful. And I'm a talker. So I think talking about it helps a lot. So with my buddies in our downtime, we talk about it a lot. And when we're on the mountain, we talk about it a lot. Even if the avalanche is not scary that day, I almost always at the top of a run say, how do you feel about avalanches today?
Yeah, I love that as an awareness practice, and a little bit different, but we're often like it as an AA saying, as sick as our secrets, a little bit different
Mm,
context, but just getting rid of the shame of being fearful, right?
yes.
That can open people up to talk about it, to be mindful, to not go for it when maybe they're second guessing the
Mm,
situation. Yeah, I love that you said, my answer would have been death. And it's interesting because you've already lived so fully. I think a lot of
maybe.
so it's a really interesting piece.
And just one thing I want to add is death is not so much for myself either, right? Like I fear for my family and
Yeah.
my friends because I've had a lot of friends pass and I know that impact. And I've had family members, close family members pass, and I know that impact. So I just wanted to add that in because I bet that's something you'll have more
Yeah.
insight on.
It's really interesting. So one of the theories around suicide, little tangent here, is that a lot of people end up committing suicide because they feel like they're a burden to other people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Because it's
and
the
so like
opposite. It hurts
yeah,
people so
yeah,
much.
yeah. And it's like, yeah, so I'm just thinking about that as you shared that, and thinking about this tendency of people to commit suicide perhaps when they're not able to enter flow state skiing or being whatever that craft might be for them, and how they may feel like they're a burden to other people. And it kind of comes to, when I think of like birth and death, again being heavily influenced by Eastern philosophy, I aim in mindfulness to connect with a part of myself that was never born, will never die. And I imagine that in my dying moments, there will be like, for people that have had near death experiences, I think many of them talk about actually feeling like this huge sense of surrender and
Mm.
huge sense of peace. And this we can wrap on is in Abraham Maslow's literature. We often are familiar with this concept of self-actualization as our highest level need
Mm.
and potential. But what was really uncovered by my friend, Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, in his book Transcend, The New Science of Self-Actualization, is that actually what Maslow pointed to as our highest level need is a sense of self-transcendence. And he realized that in his elder age, as he's having heart attacks and confronting his mortality, is that he actually experienced like a deeper sense of peace and calm and meaning. And so, there's something interesting around being on that edge of death and feeling that sense of connection to like a transcendent sense of ourself that we often aren't in touch with throughout our life, where we feel like we need to do things to be whole. Like I need to do more to be something. There's all these contingencies, but when we're faced with death or have a near death experience, even in flow state, we connect with a part of self that's maybe even just whole as it is. And I hope, again, thinking about mindfulness as being a true refuge, that's what I'm pointing to is like, yes, mindfulness is being present in the here and now, but it's also connecting with a part of ourself in some philosophies that's never born, that will never die, that is whole in and of itself. There's a lot of spiritual peace in that. To put it really in layman's terms, for me, when I'm like on a flight and those turbulence start happening, there's like a point where you have to just be like, all right, it's been a good life. If I pass now, like let me just enjoy this moment.
That's crazy because when I was younger and the plane got really turbulent, I was so afraid. And
Yeah.
now that I'm older, when a plane gets super turbulent, I'm like, take it down. I'm good. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like that, like it's not, it's what you're saying. And I'm not saying as
Yeah.
eloquently, but it's like I'm more content. I feel like
Yeah.
I've lived a good life and I'm more satisfied. Where when I was young, I think there was an innate fear that was just built into me. Like, oh God, no, like I haven't gotten to do the things I want to do. There's so many things in that trick that you just said triggered me deeply. And I love Mark Twain's quote that
Mm.
it kind of reflects on what you're saying about before you're born and after you die. That Mark Twain has a quote, something along the lines
Yes.
of, I do not fear death. I was dead for billions of years before I was born, and it didn't, I never suffered the slightest inconvenience. Something like that, And it's so
Nice.
that even gives me like the chills right now just hearing it. It's like, God, it's so true. Because I think so many of us, including myself, fear death. And so any way to take the edge off of it a little bit, I think really helps. And I like that you said that transcendence with, I forget what your examples were, but an example that I really think of is, when people are like your friend who's getting older and
Mm.
having heart attacks, and understanding that, wow, this is actually bringing me, this near death is bringing me closer to life and making me savor more. And I love that cancer patients can give that to people.
Mm.
So I've had some cancer patients in my family and they really don't sweat the small stuff. They really start enjoying life and savoring and really enjoying the food they eat and the people they're with. And you see that. And even there's a guy named Doc Renneker in San Francisco who's a really famous big wave surfer. And he's talked about in the famous book Barbarian Days. And it's a terrific book. William Finnegan, I think, is the author. And Doc Renneker was a regular doctor, but after dealing with oncology and cancer patients, he realized these are the most interesting people. They live life so well. They're the most alive people of all. I'm just going to switch to oncology. And for most of us, we think, wow, switching to studying cancer patients only would be a downer. But he saw exactly the opposite for the reasons that you have stated here.
Beautiful. Yeah. So Abraham Maslow, to kind of tie that together, he found that in moments of confronting our mortality, we connect to fulfilling a deeper need to transcend ourself, right?
Mm,
And in that transcending ourself, we felt this deeper sense of fulfillment, but also like a touching our furthest reaches of our potential. There's more here. So, to just connect back to people who we've lost and our own mortality, may we all kind of go into the dark night feeling this sense of transcendence, this deep sense of connection to others, connection to the things that bring us joy, and a great sense of peace that we would not experience if we're not able to reach those potentials to really go for it in life. And so there's an interesting paradox here. Obviously, we're kind of haven't mentioned is how we're talking about protecting against flow's dark side, and yet also recognizing that things happen. And if we do perish in a flow state, perhaps there's no other way we'd want to.
And you hear that a lot, right? At least he or she died doing what they love, which people can argue back and forth on how they feel about that. But the value of that is in what you're saying. If you passed away in your flow state in this very happy, elated, special, arguably the best state you could be in, maybe that's a little more acceptable than it may have been in other cases.
Yeah.
So we've really gone into all kinds of interesting tangents and examples and really interesting, ways to manage, what can happen with the dark side of flow state and how to manage it. But let's be concise and clear on what are the best ways to fight the dark side of flow state.
So this is how I work as a psychologist. Okay. So with my clients, we do two things really simply. We get clear on like, who am I at my best? So we can look at those moments of skiing and say, like, what is it about this that makes me feel so alive? What values are coming forward? I would say, how do we protect against the dark side of flow? Have that self-awareness of, what is my North Star? What is my personal philosophy? Get really clear on that. And then learn how to stitch together through mindfulness many moments of that. So it's not just when you're on the mountain, it's not just when you're big wave surfing, but it's when you're connecting with your partner, when you're doing your taxes even. Like, can we stitch together feeling the sense of authenticity, sense of alignment, even in the mundane activities in our life? And then the work is to train our mind to enter that state. So it's easy to say it, okay, let's just feel aligned. The work is to train the mind and therefore change the brain to truly experience that. And so I'll give some examples. One practice I do with my clients to feel a sense of control in their life is called a morning mindset routine. When we wake up in the morning, we can get up and just go for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like be in that flow state and just fucking rip and run. Or we can just, before we even get out of bed, take one deep breath. Okay, so we're training ourselves to be calm with that deep breath. We're also actually becoming truly awake. We're taking an automatic process of breathing and being intentional and conscious of it. So one deep breath, think one good thought of gratitude, like what's one good thing that trains us to be resilient. It also probably trains us to not think we need to seek something immediate to feel okay. Set the intention for the day. And then as you get up out of bed, just feel your feet on the floor, be in the here and now, and then get on with it. So that's one example of one intervention, one practice that can take literally 5 seconds before you get up onto the mountain.
Almost a miniature meditation.
Exactly. That would give you the self-awareness and that sense of control so that when you're up with those teenagers that are telling you to do the backflip now or whatnot,
Punks.
you might have a little bit more awareness and control. So again, my work is like getting clear on who you are at your best, then stitching together micro moments where you're connecting throughout your day. So I said one moment in the morning, what would that look like in the evening? We can go into examples and then stitching more of these moments throughout the day. So again, it's these moments where we're being intentional, where we're being present, connecting to something that's important and of value, again, that personal philosophy. And that would be my recommendation. It's like, I think everyone listening to this podcast is probably really good at enter flow. You put them on the mountain, they're probably dropping in. It's probably more important and helpful for folks here, myself included, to develop the ability to be mindful and to feel a sense of wholeness in the stillness, in the being of life.
Very well said. And I'm going to start doing that because, yeah, I noticed that even today. I kind of dragged myself out of bed. I'm just kind of walking in circles for a while before I'm like, what am I doing today? Like, how do I need to look at my schedule? What am I, it'd be nice just to have that earlier, awareness and centering. And I'm curious, where do you see meditation and gratitude fitting in with all this?
So one of the qualities of flow is being deeply in the present moment. So obviously meditation trains us to be focused. So there's research that shows it promotes getting into flow, but then it also can help this potential dark side of losing self-control. So meditation certainly trains us to be able to enter flow more consistently. Gratitude for me, here's another diagram that can be helpful. So let's imagine two circles. The one circle is like ourself and the other is like the world. What happens in a flow state and a mindfulness and in different states like awe and love and purpose is that these two circles, they slowly kind of merge together, right? And they kind of become one. we can live our life feeling very separate, very disconnected. And there's this, it's called the unitary continuum of human experience, I believe. It's this merging. So awe or gratitude, it's a connection to something deeper beyond ourselves. It's a transcendent experience. And the piece that I'll share here is, again, I mentioned one of my national athletes I work with. I love that they have this gratitude practice before they do their thing, because it's connecting to the present moment, right? It's like, oh, I'm grateful to be here, whatever it might be. It's connecting to a part of themselves that's beyond themselves. It's like it's gratitude to something bigger. And it's a perfect way, obviously, to feel calm. Like, we're typically not grateful when we're feeling anxious and overwhelmed. And so, those would be some things that would connect to mindfulness and gratitude. But what I want to finish off with here to like make this really practical and I think tangible for everyone listening is like, wherever you are now in the way you're thinking, you're acting, as Buddha said, like, this is just a habit. Like, it's just a habit. Like, if you're anxious, if you're fearful, if you're losing self-control, whatever it might be, it's like, it's simply a result of how you've thought in the past. And so listening to this podcast, doing the work to train to think differently right after this podcast, it will have a carryover effect. And where you want to start is start with small problems. Like, catch that fear, anxiety, sadness, whatever it might be, when it's really small. Like, work on it when it's workable. Transform small challenges into moments to be present, to laugh, to feel awe, whatever, gratitude, whatever it might be, so that when the big challenges in life show up, you've done the front loading to train yourself to be optimistic, to train yourself to be grateful. So start small. Realize that the way that you're thinking now is simply a habit pattern that you have full control over. As my Buddhist now would say, you are the boss. But start with things that are small, that are in your control, so that you're ready for when the big challenges show up.
That's beautiful, man. And I think that's something we could all do better. So I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. Also, in that ideology and in this idea of gratitude, it does make me reflect back to your experience of taking acid and going skiing with your buddies. And I've done that once as well. And I found an amazing connection. And then we had quite a big group. And so I am curious, just to end the show here, you've mentioned the healing power of psychedelics in your work. How do you see this fitting into the conversation around flow and performance?
What a great way to end. There's amazing research on the power of psychedelics for healing. Let's use a ski example. So when we think about our brain, we can think of it as like a ski mountain that has all these ski tracks or snowboard tracks throughout it. So it's like everyone's going to get to that secret run in the back country or whatnot, or hiking to get there. It's like there's these ingrained ways of thinking and being throughout our brain. What happens in a psychedelic state, it's like, usually they use the example of the mountain gets groomed. But let's use the example of like a ton of powder. Okay, so like
I like that better.
Yes, me too. So a ton of powder kind of coats the brain, these neural pathways, and makes the mountain fresh again. Like, there's new ways of thinking, there's new ways of being, there's even a newer sense of self. And so the healing power of psychedelics is that it essentially down regulates this default mode network, this default way of thinking and being, and it opens us up to live life with great flexibility. Like, to how else do I want to show up? And the work in psychedelics, connecting now back to that adrenaline junkie or the flow junkie, is to take that moment, right? To take that moment and continuously see, how can I connect with this when I'm sober? Or like, how can I connect to that peak moment skiing? How can I connect to that wild insight I had when I was on the psychedelic state? And how does that make sense now? And we can do that. And maybe one last really tangible practice I can share with folks here is the power of writing. Self-authorship is such a powerful way to harness our thinking and our thoughts. And I want to share one practice. And this is a practice I've come across being a newer father and having some significant challenges in my life in the last few years. And it's a practice of self-compassion. So for everyone, to your point around like, hey, I'm getting older, I can't do the things I used to do. Self-compassion is a practice which is very simple. And it changes our relationship to ourselves of having to prove ourselves, having to show that we're better than others, whatever it might be, to a practice of just like, hey man, I love myself. I want myself to do well. And that can be a really helpful state. And this is the practice. So if you want to get a pen and paper out, or just in the future, remember, we can call this a self-compassion break. All right. And it's 3 steps. The first step is you write number 1, mindfulness. So write down all the stressful thoughts you're having about not being the skier you once were, or all the challenges you're having in your relationship or financially, whatever it might be. Write about not just the challenge, but write about like the emotions that are connected to it. Get really clear on that. Step number 2, let's title this Common Humanity. Write about how this challenge that you're having is common to the human experience. All skiers get older. We all struggle with things in our life. And also write about how that emotion that you're experiencing, let's just call it sadness or fear or anxiety, is also common to the human experience, right? The point being, coming back to being tribal, is we can feel a sense of connection, a sense of wholeness, belonging in our challenges. We don't need to feel like we need to be in fight or flight. We can actually self-soothe ourselves, feel okay in it. And then the third step is, let's write number 3 and write kindness. So this is where, for again, a couple of minutes, you write words of support for yourself. Essentially words of like encouragement, belief in yourself, wanting again yourself to do well. I do this activity all the time. It's actually, to be honest, it's the starting point in my work with my clinical clients now, because a lot of them are really high performers, and especially as athletes, they've used self-criticism to motivate themselves, because it gives you that adrenaline, gives you that fearlessness, right? It really works in some context, but for the long game of life, the research is very clear. And this is Kristen Neff's exercise and a lot of her research. Self-compassion helps us be more resilient. It helps us with decision-making and processing. And so again, finishing off with words of encouragement. And to come back to psychedelics here, I first really started connecting with self-compassion as I was soothing my son. When he was an infant, you're like rocking the baby, right? And it's like this moment where you feel this euphoria, and this, like, the only time I'd ever really experienced that was on MDMA. And realizing that was just coming really from what I was saying. I was humming, I was saying I love you, I was bouncing back and forth. Like, those are things I can do for myself, and maybe not in that exact way, but I can say really kind, affirming things to myself and connect back to that state in a way. So that would be something I think we could all value, especially as we get older, and just in a culture where it's often based on self-esteem. Learning to do things because we just love and want good for ourselves can really support us to have control of flow and to enter more of a mindful state.
I really appreciate all of that. I'm going to do that as soon as we get off this podcast. I talked to psychiatrist Dr. Rob Gaffney on this podcast, who's a great skier as well. And I was telling him what we talked about today, how I'm changing as I get older. I can't do what I used to do. And it's hard for me. And he says, yeah, you're grieving. And I think it's part of what you're saying too. You're actually kind of grieving this part of yourself that you have left behind that's no longer here. And so I think we do have to really work through that self-criticism and then that self-compassion to get to that better place. And it's okay to grieve, go through that process and maybe even say it, write it down. Like, hey, I'm grieving that I can't do this kind of skiing anymore. And after I had that talk with him, that mental part of me has improved dramatically.
Wow. Beautiful.
So thank you for adding to that. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Dr. Brent, for sharing all your insights with us today. Are there any final messages you'd like to share at the end of the show?
One, I'd love to ski with you and ski
Yes.
with your community. I'm definitely, you got to keep me in the loop about things. Would love that. And for people, if they want to connect with me, certainly just my website, brenthogarth.com, but also, for whether it's coaching or counseling or, wanting to consult on bringing flow state into your sport or into your business. I love opportunities to do public speaking. And so any opportunities to do that, I'd love to have discovery calls with you and learn more about how flow and mindfulness could be of value to your company. And also hit me up on LinkedIn. It's definitely where I do my only kind of real social and share more on the science of flow. And so I'd love folks to connect with me there, and feel free to schedule a free call with me anytime. I want to connect with your community. I want more invites to cool skiing outings. I'm here again in Vancouver, so if anyone wants to ski Cypress, local mountains, or Whistler, I'm all game. And huge pleasure to connect with you. And again, I want to just honor all those legends who have lived life fully, who are still here and who are not here. It was really meaningful to kind of connect to them in the call too, and to everyone who's been impacted by them, friends, family, all of that. It's a really amazing community to be part of. And so thank you for welcoming me as a guest.
Thank you so much for being here. That was very eloquent. I appreciate you so much, Dr. Brent. I do want to ski with you, and I do want to talk to you again. So have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk soon. Thank you so much for listening to the SnowBrains Podcast. If you like this podcast, please share with friends and family, and please make sure to subscribe. To find out more about SnowBrains, please visit us at snowbrains.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and more. This episode of the SnowBrains Podcast is brought to you by Club Med. Experience the ultimate ski getaway at Club Med, where every detail is meticulously taken care of. With their all-inclusive packages, you can focus on what you love most, skiing. With over 20 plus mountain resorts in the Alps, Japan, and Canada, enjoy world-class slopes, refreshing après-ski activities, and gourmet meals, all while knowing your accommodations, lift tickets, and childcare are all included. Let Club Med take the worry out of your ski vacation so you can simply relax and enjoy the ride. Visit www.clubmed.us. Call 1-800-CLUB-MED or call your travel advisor to plan your stress-free ski escape. This episode of the SnowBrains Podcast was edited by Liam Abbott. Music by Chad Crouch. And I'm your host, creator, and director, Miles Clark.